Good morning, friends, and welcome back to Random Hearts. Today we're in the backyard and we are geared up to finish up our garden beds today. I am going to be planting everything out into them. That is our tomatoes, our peppers. I'm even going to plant our bush beans. I did check my soil temperature. Most of the beds are around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, so I feel confident that I will get good germination with that temperature. And so we're going to go ahead and plant out into the garden today, but I think the first thing I want to do is I want to plant some of my annual flowers out into my garden beds and my flower beds. I do have some in-ground planting to do. I have some container planting to do, but you'll notice that I'm dressed very lovely today. I do live at an elevation of over 6,000 feet above sea level, and so I am very much aware of my high UV here, and so I do protect myself. I know it's not the most beautiful thing, but I do wear sunscreen on my face and on my hands because I typically am not a glove wearer. But I am a redhead. I do burn very, very easily. And so I just want to protect myself and make sure that I am safe while I am outside. We do have weather coming in this afternoon, and so that's pretty typical this time of year. I do need to get going on this because I've got a lot to do. And so let's just get started. I am beginning with the annual planting underneath our Autumn Blaze maple tree. This tree is about 2 years old, and it does not provide a ton of shade yet, but it will eventually. So for right now, I can put in the Supertunia Vista Paradise. They should do quite well in this space. They get quite a lot of morning sun and afternoon sun, but they do get some dappled shade during the midday. So I'm hoping that this will be a good choice for this spot. The color is a little bit bright for what I was wanting in this area. I kind of wanted a little more on the oranger tone, but I have limited resources where I live, so I basically get what I get and don't throw a fit. So this will work for me. I'm just planting these into this bed, adding a little bit of fertilizer. You'll see that in my little yellow cup, and then recovering everything. This bed does have mini bark in it, and so I do have to recover everything with that mini bark after I get the soil out of the way. Once I have everything planted, I'm just going to quick water it in. I've now moved on to 2 of the planters that hang from my fence. These sit right above my garden. I am using a slow release fertilizer. This is added to the pot at the very bottom. I have a very small amount of soil in there. You'll notice that I have a planter in the foreground. That planter is showing an example of what it will look like when it is all potted up. They are still in their planters, so they have not been potted yet. I am just looking at plant tabs to make sure that I am getting the tallest plant to sit on the back side. Because these do sit on a flat surface, they do have a backside. They are not 360 degrees of surface. So this plant right here is the Blue Felicia Daisy. This is the Cape Town Blue, and this one does get 8 to 12 inches tall. So it is the taller of the 3 plants that I'm going to be putting in there with flowers today. The plant I'm working with right now is a Super Bell. That is a tangerine punch. That one gets 6 to 12 inches tall as well, but most of that will be trailing. So that will work along the sides to trail off the edges. Now I'm going to be putting in another Super Bell. This is the Coralina. Same thing, 6 to 12 inches in height. And all of these plants are full to part sun. So I'm planting these in just very shallow soil, and I will go back through and add soil in between each plant right at the end. I've got a vinca right here. This is just a small variegated vinca. That one will hang off the very front of this planter. And then as I fill in all those gaps, I'm going to grab some more soil, just dry, making sure that none of the plants are wet. This does not work real well when the soil is wet or the plants are wet. But I just push that in and kind of press it around all of the root balls, making sure that everything is tucked into that planter nice and steady, making sure that everything is hanging over the edge. I kind of angle my root balls out towards the outside edge, so the flowers are a little more towards the outside. The root balls are a little more angled towards the center of the planter. And then as I get finished here, I'm going to go ahead and add some mulch over the top of everything. I use what is called soil conditioner. It is very finely shredded bark. I use this as a top dressing on all of my garden beds. That helps with water retention. As I water, those little wood chips will absorb that water and hold it for later use for the plant. It also helps those roots to stay a little cooler. And in my garden, where my native soil has very little organic matter, it adds some additional organic matter to the soil. So I'm just going to continue top dressing these, and then I will add them to my fence where they hang on the hooks. And I'm very pleased with how these turned out. I have now moved on to one of my favorite planters in my yard. This is a radio flyer wagon that used to be my children's when they were younger, and it has since rusted, so it's not a very usable wagon anymore, but I love it as a planter. My husband built this wooden box for it a few years ago, and I did add fresh soil this year, and I'm just adding a little bit of that continuous release fertilizer to the box, mixing that in really well, and then I'm going to start by putting my tallest plant right in the center of that box. This is an unplugged So Blue Salvia. This will get 14 to 24 inches tall. It needs full to part sun. This is a perfect location for this. It is right underneath our apple tree, and so it gets a lot of midday sun and a little bit of shade in the afternoon and mornings. I'm also going to mirror image everything in this box. So on this side, I am going to have two of those Super Bells, the Tangerine Punch. Those will go on this side, and then I will mirror that on the other side of the Salvia. I'm just going to tuck those in, push the soil around them, and then I have some Snowland Daisies that I'm going to add to the very end of the box. I have 3 of them. They will get to be 8 inches tall. So I'm going to do that on both ends of the bed, and that will finish up this planter. Again, I will top dress everything with some of that soil conditioner, and I will water it all in, and that's going to be everything for this little planter box. This is one of my favorites. I love it. It does not move from underneath this apple tree. I used to move it, and it's not in very good shape anymore, so I just leave it alone and fill it up with beautiful flowers, and this is how it has turned out this year. I decided not to film the process of putting these next planters together, but I did want to briefly talk to you about the fillers, spillers, and thrillers that go into putting an aesthetic planter together. Now in this pot in particular, that thriller is my purple fountain grass in the center. I have a couple of spillers in this one. I have some verbena and some supertunias, and then a filler is that euphorbia and lobelia, and I do have a coleus that kind of fits into a couple of categories. Here is the recipe of what went into that pot. This is a grouping of 3 planters, and they need to kind of work together and be cohesive. So I have used a similar color scheme. I've got a blue salvia in the middle, and I have used a verbena again. Here is that recipe. The last pot in this grouping is much smaller, and this Supertunia Vista Paradise should be plenty enough for that pot. We are now planting in the garden beds. These are my raised beds. I have 5 of them, and this one is closest to the lawn area. It also gets the most sunlight, so I am putting tomatoes into this bed, or as many as I can. This is a New Girl tomato. This one has some really low-lying branches, and you'll see in a minute I will pinch those off. There is one on the left that is going to disappear in just a couple seconds, and voila. The tomatoes in this bed will get watered with drip irrigation, and that is the black and blue line that you can see right there. It goes off twice a day. Right now I have it going off for about 20 minutes at a time, but we are turning that off occasionally. We've been getting a ton of rain lately.
The tomato I'm working on right now is a Mountain Magic, and I am taking off any of those lower leaves, anything that's touching the ground. I do not want on a tomato plant. It is not healthy for the plant. It can produce some withered up leaves, and it can lead to disease. So I am just making sure everything's got a thin layer of mulch on it right now. That's that same soil conditioner, making sure everything is labeled and tagged because I do have different tomatoes in this bed. And so I want to make sure I know which ones are doing well. Then I'm going to move over to these peppers. These are a California Wonder. They are a sweet green pepper. I have 3 of them, and I basically lay out all of my plants before I put them into my beds just to see how they will do. I am also going to pinch off some of those lower leaves on this plant. And you'll see that I am adding a little bit of fertilizer to the soil as I'm planting these. I am using Espoma's Garden Tone. I used Plant Tone on the rest of my flowers and stuff in the yard, but Garden Tone is used here. Now, I could use Garden Tone basically on everything, but I'm just using a tiny bit of that in the soil along with the mulch on top. That seems to give my plants the best start. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep planting those. I've got 3 of those to plant here. Those, again, are the California Wonder. They did really well for me last year, but the seeds I am using are starting to get a little bit old. Right now, I don't have any problems with germination. I didn't have any issues this year, and they did grow quite well. You'll see this one I'm putting in right now is very tall, and I'm very happy with how everything turned out. They just did really well for me. So I'm going to go ahead and tag everything up, put some mulch on it, and then I will work my way down on this bed. I have now moved on to the bed that is directly behind the one I was just working in. This one is closest to the fence. I did finish up putting 2 more tomatoes into the other bed along with some beans, and I am putting some more beans into this bed. This is a different variety. These are some Blue Lake bush beans, and I have 2 square feet to work with here, so I'm going to go ahead and put those in. I did have some discrepancies between the envelopes on my bush beans. One of them said that I needed to go 1 inch deep, and the other 2 said a ½ inch deep. So I'm kind of going in between here and going about 3/4 of an inch deep. And you'll see that I am going to put 2 beans into each hole. That is because this particular seed is pretty old. I've had it for several years. Last year it did germinate pretty well, but we had warm temperatures almost immediately, and this year we are very slow to heat up. We have got a little bit of rain pretty much in the forecast every single day, which cools our temperatures down to about 60 degrees. And so we're just not getting to those warm temps that beans like in order to germinate. Right here, I'm realizing I've got a couple extra seeds, and they are not enough for me to keep the entirety of that packet for another year. So I'm going to go ahead and put those into the ground closer to that pea trellis. Hopefully they don't cause any issues there. And then I'm just pinching and making sure everything is down into the ground and patted in and ready to go. You'll notice I do not water anything in my beds until I am completely done with the bed. And that is because I do not want a muddy mess when I'm working with the other plants on the other side of the bed. So this is going to go into the ground. I'm going to give it a little tiny bit of that Garden Tone fertilizer right on the top. I'm top dressing it. And then I will add some soil conditioner, and I will not water this in until I am completely done with everything in this bed. And that's all there is to it. I will work with the amethyst beans on the other side here in just a minute. Now that all the beans are planted, I am moving on to the next bed. I am quickly running out of time though because the weather is starting to come in. So I wanted to get these large tomatoes into the ground. These are my Sweetie tomatoes. They are a cherry style tomato, and they are by far my largest tomato. So I am having to stake these. I also did not show you on my other beds, but I do cage all of my tomatoes from the very start. I make sure that those are caged as soon as I transplant them, It's really kind of useless at the beginning, but I have found that it's easier to put a cage around a smaller plant than it is a larger plant, and there is definitely less damage. I just planted a jalapeno in the center of that bed, and now I am adding some basil plants, and I will eventually add some marigolds around all those and a few envy zinnias at the back of that bed. I do like to mix flowers with fruits and vegetables. That does help with pollinators, and sometimes it helps with bugs and the flavor. So I think this is about where we're going to leave this today. You can see right here I am putting those cages on. All of my tomatoes have those now, but I appreciate you being here. I hope this has been helpful. If you were interested in seeing how I put all of this into my gardens and how it comes together. But basically all of my garden beds are planted up. I do have quite a few annual flowers that still need to go out into my flower beds and elsewhere into the yard. But you'll see right here, we've got some cloud cover coming in, and the weather starts to change pretty rapidly. And so I did not have a whole lot of time, and basically this is all the more I got done. So I'm going to leave this right here. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. We hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.